What's
Here we
up? What's
go.
up, guys? It's live.
Happy
We're
Friday.
real. It's a fine line
Love it.
Friday.
I feel like,
Yeah.
it's almost a fine line every day, but hey, Friday is especially real.
This is the 30 minutes that you take to work on the business rather than in the business, right?
Absolutely. I enjoy this segment too because I'm detached as well. And I just get to chat with a good old friend of mine, Chad Westbrook. How you doing?
I'm doing good, and I'll tell you, I enjoy this as well because it's not this like massive prepare presentation side. It's an opportunity where you and I get to, share our experiences, which sometimes have been inside the same territory, sometimes in different territories, and from different parts in the business, right? Like I got customers that I work with in Washington State. I got customers that I work with in Florida, all the way up to New England. And at the end of the day, the process is very similar on how they run the business, right?
Yeah.
And today is that massive part, backlog, which is, to me, it's so wide on like, do you even look at backlog? Are you only as good as what you invoice? There's just so much I think to unpack with that, and that's what I'm excited about today is to really talk about what backlog means, my side, your side, and then really hopefully get to a point where we can say, is there a perfect backlog?
Yeah. I like that too. In the different perspectives, you're, I'd say, in the trenches a lot and you get to see a lot working shoulder to shoulder with contractors. And I'm outside in at this point in my shoes right now. So the insight that I get to see ranges from guys that have no backlog all the way up to guys that have a significant amount of backlog. So let's unpack. Let's dive in.
And yes, and both sides of those are scary to me, right?
Mm,
Use an example. I have a few contractors within a single metro, and I've had the same conversation 3 times this week, 3 separate conversations, 3 separate contractors, but it was like, I don't have a backlog, right? And the first thing that I do is I go in and we look at like what the weather's like. And it's like, okay, well, it rained Saturday, right? Or I think it was Sunday. It rained Sunday, which means anybody who is a reactive client, and to my world, that's someone who's only going to call you when they have a problem, right? Now my roof's fine. I don't have any leaks. We're all good. They're only going to call you when they have a problem, unless of an HVAC unit, right? Leaking, that's of course the roof. Like that's the only time you're going to get that backlog, right? For your leaks is when
yeah.
something happens with weather. But then the opposite side that you said is like, man, I got $200,000 worth of backlog, which that number could be fine, right? And we'll talk about that. But I have $200,000 worth of backlog. That can also be scary because the only thing, I mean, if you only have 2 trucks and you have 200,000 in backlog, your customer probably hates you, or customers probably hate you, right?
Yeah. Right. Because they're not getting the service that they want or need or deserve. But I think it's important too to set the table because there's two sides to backlog. There's production backlog and there's service backlog. Production backlog, yeah, that could be spanned out across a long period of time, and there's a lot to go with that. I think what we're talking about right now is service backlog.
Yes, 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 yes. And you're right. Production backlog is a completely different animal, which would be a completely different series, right? Where, I mean, you got GCs and you might have jobs that you won that don't start for 6 or 8 months.
Hmm.
But I guess in the same sense, you could be working with a GC on a service side for a tenant finish job, right?
Absolutely.
So they can go hand in hand, right? And understanding what that backlog is. Now, I use that example of $200,000 in backlog. Now, that number might sound great depending on how big your company is. But what if I told you that $200,000 backlog was only 2 jobs and it doesn't start until September? Is it still a good backlog?
Yeah. And to kind of comment a little bit on your being able to react to create your backlog that's short term. And I
Yeah.
don't think anybody wants to be held to weather to dictate their sales. So when you dive into what do I got to do to create the backlog, let's kind of go down that channel a little bit. So maybe talk about the contractors that don't have a backlog I got a couple of comments on this too, because where do you start? How do you start to build up that backlog? And then maybe from there we can, if we remember to, go into the what's the balance of how much backlog and how to manage it.
100%. And I think first off, we need to back up even further to the last or one that we've done a little bit back, which is how much can your truck produce, right? Because that
Yeah,
is a huge, huge part to what a good backlog amount is. Now, high level, we talked about 500,000, right? Or 520, $10,000, $2,000 a day, right? So if you guys haven't watched that one, go back. We talked about ultimately $2,000 a day for a truck, 10,000 a week, 40,000 a month. That's a really, I'll say, baseline to make it easy to understand. So if you have four trucks and they do $10,000 a week each, that's 40,000, right?
yep,
Sometimes. And I'll throw the variable in this, Will, right? So that was almost a little more of a rhetorical question. Um, I've had jobs, I've had $20,000 projects that I've got done in 1 week, right? So there's two different types of ways to look at backlog. One is by revenue, dollar amounts, which does feed into the P&L. The second one is by hours, right? How many
yeah.
hours do you have in some of those larger contracts? So sorry if I sidetracked that a little bit, but it's not just a really simple, hey, here's the checkbox, check it, and you got a good backlog. How did you go about looking at backlog? Again, what was your side, and then I can tell you how I kind of looked at it.
Yeah, I mean, it's living and breathing, and it's changing every single day. I think first and foremost, I had a duty, or I felt like I had a duty to keep my guys busy. I also had a duty to keep customers happy. If they didn't have 40 hours, if every single tech, every truck didn't have at least 40 hours, I wasn't doing my part. So for the tools that I had in place, that's techs on and off roofs, I'm going to gather that information, and that a percentage of that's going to convert to sales. Account managers, sales reps, estimators, PMs on and off roofs, I need to extract that information to convert it into sales. So the that's part of it. The other part is, of the leak work that we had, let's say that accounts for 30% of the bandwidth for that week. Last series we talked about living in the week, living in the day, and that's how I kind of thought about things too. But if we only had 30% of our capacity, a board, the service board for the week only has 30% of it filled out, what am I going to do to fill the rest of it in? And that's scope work. So, some of those packed 3, 4, 5 weeks out of scope work with flexibility to hit leaks in between. Because I think if you're managing your backlog, you have to hit the reactive stuff, but the reactive is going to convert to the proactive, right? Yours may piggyback off that to some extent, I'm sure.
Yeah. No, I'm with you on that, right? So let's stay in this rabbit hole, right? So backlog to me is work that has not been started yet. So you
Mm-hmm.
have backlog, work has not been started yet. We have work in progress, which means you started the job, but it hasn't been invoiced yet, right? And then you have invoiced revenue, which is the invoice has already been sent, right? So what we're talking about here is work that has not been started yet. That's backlog.
Yep.
So side one, we don't have enough, right? And by the end of this, we'll get to the point of what that perfect backlog is. But step one is we don't have enough, which Will said perfectly. My guys don't have 40 hours, which means my guys might be looking for another job. They're not getting the paychecks they need. Like, that's a scary, scary part to be in. And I think the question that you had come through was awesome, which is like, where do I start? And you hit the nail on the head. I'm with you, right? So first off, the easiest job to sell is the client who's already bought from you. And I say this all the time to the sales reps, like, you guys are out there fighting to be able to get an opportunity to get on a roof. Our technicians are there every day, right? Like, they're up on that roof. They see, right? Yeah, just because it's a bullet hole in a metal panel and that's the leak, they have the opportunity to look for additional things. And
Definitely.
that sometimes is the biggest integrity thing that we can do, right? Is we don't get off a roof knowing that it's going to leak on another side of the building tomorrow when it rains. So to me, that's where I would start. Start with your technicians that are already up on that roof, and get them communicating. They're your eyes, your hands, your ears, right? To everything that's happening, and get them communicating, even if it is to you as an owner or a service manager, or I mean, even a salesman. There's a lot of different processes you can build around that, but get them communicating. That's where I would start. Agree, disagree?
Totally agree. And if you're even, let's say, primarily a replacement contractor, and you don't have all those calls coming in, you still got warranty work you're responding to. I'd still use that as the same use case or example to find more work. So much of us get busy. We just want to get the job done, get the job done, get the job done. But we got to slow down, or we're not going to have work next week, right? So you got to slow down to build what we're quoting, what we're sharing with customers, so that way we have scope work. And I think a good way to look at it is forecasting out. Look, I got 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, and beyond of scope work because you can schedule that. There's always room to kind of maneuver as long as you're communicating. But for the other side of the coin, it's about where do I go to find a new customer? So many of us are focused on how do I get a new customer. Great place to look, counting. Go to your counting program. How many roofs have you installed, right? And reach out to them. To your point, whoever you've done business with before is more likely to buy from you again. And I'm sure you call those people and say, hey, I'm going to come out and look at your roof. They're more apt to say, go ahead. Agreed?
Yeah. 100%. So I asked this question in every like higher level sales conversation that I have. So we look at what your sales were. That's great. That's cool. Now let me ask another question. How much money from those, so take those sales, those customers that you had, how much more money did they spend on roofing that was not with you? Right? That to me is the bigger question, right? Just because I did $100,000 with CBRE doesn't mean that was 100% of their spend. And I know we're kind of going into that sales side, right? But like you said, it's easier because you don't have the trust factor, right? Anytime you go to someone new, you got to build trust. You got to build social proof, right? And you have to have possibly sometimes a solution that's better than the current contractor that they're using. That stuff's hard, right? Like I respect sales reps for going out and finding new customers and building that relationship to where they trust us to give us work, but that takes time.
Yeah.
And what you and I are talking about right here is I don't have time. My guys don't have 40 hours right this week, right? Like their check next week is not going to be what they need it to be. And you can't always look
Yeah.
at your sales team to say, hey guys, we need to sell more, even as a service manager, right? Or an owner or wherever it is. It's what's happening today up on that roof.
Absolutely. We're going to be talking about this on the upcoming podcast we have with Rupert's Coffee Shop, but this goes into that topic. To me, it's an integration between your sales and service efforts. They complement each other. Now, your service guys, even if you got one truck, right, or 10 or however many, service guys are on and off roofs, walking by opportunity. How do we capture that, and how do we pair it with good account management? And then you got sales reps, estimators on and off roofs, encountering not just replacement opportunities, but service opportunities. So how do we connect the two? And the companies that have been able to pull that off the best seem to have a constant stream of backlog. And then you manage the chaos. You add trucks as you increase the backlog. I think there's a ratio there too.
There is. There 100% is, right? So we talked about not having a backlog, right? And when you don't have a backlog, my guys don't have the hours they need, so on and so on. I get it. It's stressful. And sometimes as much as you want to be able to press on sales, or we need more sales, we need more sales, like we're not going to make this work. I'm going to tell you, take a deep breath and just say, what can we do to win the day, right? We know that whatever proposals we're going to deliver today, we're probably not going to sell today. Accept that. And then look at what our jobs, what jobs we're on today, our technicians are on today. And Will, you said it, even the warranty work and all that kind of different stuff. I was in the Carolinas about a month ago, and we were replacing skylights. And I walked down the roof that we were on, and I walked right to this like walkway, and I literally peeled up with my hand modified cap sheet that wasn't even. There was no cold process. It wasn't torched. Like I literally pulled this roof up with my hand, and like those are the opportunities sometimes that our technicians are bypassing because they're going out there, they're doing exactly what they need to do, right? Find the leak. But sometimes they're not slowing down enough to be able to say, hey, we got an open seam here, or hey, I can literally peel this roof up with my hand. I mean, it was crazy,
Yeah,
but that
yeah, but
opportunity was right there for us.
and to capitalize on that too, and everybody wins, and you may feel like I don't want to bother someone, I don't want to sell someone, but everybody wins. The building owner wins because you just prevented a future leak. The technician wins because he's got more hours. The company wins because they got more sales. So sometimes you got to slow down and speed back up, but some of it I think comes back to, I don't know what to call it, laziness, but it's like, why am I going to take that picture and send it to my boss? They need to see the why. And you can compensate them and you can tell them why and all these things, but that takes time. But I, I always felt like I was so accountable to making sure that all my guys were successful in their lives, their personal lives, even. And that started with the work life and hitting the 40 hours, even above that. But I had to get them to see why they should take that picture of that cap sheet that's not even connected to the roof. Did you have
Yep.
struggles with that? I'm sure you did. But what do you do?
No, but I love that. And I wasn't always able to do this, but if I had technicians in the field who were taking those additional photos that were helping create those scopes, right, and selling that job, that would be the individual who I would give that job to and who would get the overtime to do it, right? If that
Mm-hmm.
was the case, right? Because we have a lot of individuals that want to work overtime. And overtime, I guess from my side, this is a little biased, right? Overtime is a privilege almost. And if you're helping us get that work to where we have overtime, I'm going to give it to the people who are helping us grow the business,
Definitely.
right? Like that, they were a win with that, right? They knew if they did that site bid, right, and we sold that work, that they would be the one to produce it. They would be the one to get the overtime. And then everybody won, right? Because we hit the revenue we needed to hit. They got the overtime they needed to hit, and it was one team, one goal.
Absolutely. And you start to gain exposure, because you either, as a service manager, service director, whoever you are, you either have to manage that relationship with the client, 'cause the technician's not. So you either have to manage that relationship or you involve an account manager. But if you involve an account manager or sales rep, they kind of see that, oh wow, these service guys are like great to partner up with almost. And I think when the light bulb went off in that regard, I had a lot more success because it was one team.
Yeah, without a doubt. I mean, the partnership between the sales rep and the technician. There would be times where my sales rep would call the technician on the way to the job to say, "Hey, whatever else you find, let me know because the client's trying to reduce leaks inside the building." Right? We've had a lot of problems out here. The client's getting sick of having to call in leaks. Like, let's go above and beyond. And like that was the really cool relationships, and that's an internal relationship, right? To where
Mm-hmm.
again, my team was working in one direction. The one thing that I will say, and this is probably a little bit biased to me, but the client will make the wrong decision at times for their right reasons. And I'll say that again. The client will say, I don't want to do this, right? Or he won't award the work that you guys give. And he might have the best reason in the world. They might not have the cash. They might be getting solar next year, which is getting a brand new roof. It could be a million different things, right? But I find it negligent on our side if we don't give the client that option. Because if I go up there and I see something wrong with the roof and I don't mention it, right? Like I feel that I'm just waiting for that roof to fail. I'm waiting for that company to be able to have that disruption inside their business so they call me. I don't want to have to deal with a customer that's in like 911 mode, right? That already had to shut their production line down, that went all through all this stuff. Like, I'm not a liked guy when I'm there for that, right? I want to be the one to be able to say, hey, we got some issues on this that you should take care of proactively because we found the issue before the problem happened. And like that's where my best relationships came from is that I was sitting on the same side of the table as my customer and I was helping them solve issues before they were problems in their building because that's when my customer won.
No question. And I love models, environments that everybody wins because in that exact environment, customer wins, even though they don't know it yet. You prevented a future leak, future headache, whatever it is. Crews win because they get hours. Company wins because we get sales. But if we continue to inventory what we encounter and we house that in our systems, we can then deplete the inventory over, future as time moves on. And if you take care of those customers and you've built the inventory, that's a beautiful thing to see. That's what builds your backlog perpetually.
Yep. Yep. And I think you said, I know we want to go on to like if we have too much backlog, but if you don't have enough backlog, again, I'll go back to it. Take a breath, right? Understand that if you are on jobs this week, what your salesmen fight to do every single week is to be able to get an opportunity to get on the roof to solve a problem. Your technicians are already doing that. And not only on the roof that they're on, they can see the other roofs, right? They can see if there's, weeds or stuff growing out of gutters. They can see if there's ponding on other roofs or whatever it might be. Take advantage of those opportunities, right? Don't just get off the roof and be like, yeah, that roof is crap, right? Like, oh, yeah, he's gonna have leaks forever. Go take that extra step. Explain to the customer what's going on because they're not roofing experts. You guys are. Right. And that's where that whole professional roofer comes in, right? That professional is going to help them manage the asset. Huge part to it.
No question. In just kind of alignment of the work that we have to produce and the resources that we have to produce this work. There's a cap. It's not a magic wand you can wave and see, I've got X amount of backlog and I need this many hours specifically. You have an idea, but this goes back to managing the day, the week, to ultimately the month, but starting with the day. But if you have an idea of that threshold, let's say I've got one truck, and that one truck consistently has 2 weeks of tickets that were created 2 weeks plus ago, then that kind of gives you an idea of your ratio. Might be ready to get another truck. And then now you've got two trucks with 1 week past. And then the 1 week becomes 2 weeks again because we've sold more work. So now I'm ready to get another truck. So things like that can help you figure out your ratio, but then realizing that of the backlog, we're lumping in reactive work. That's got to go to the top of the list. And I think it's important to know the percentage of what you would consider to be leak work, warranty work versus scope work, work that's been sold.
So when did you know, or I'll use the word scared, whatever we want to use, right? When did you know that you had too much work for the amount of production capability you had, service-wise, of course?
Yeah, it's like when we were, well, clients let I'm getting a lot of calls and I'm not able to get there. Like, what's going on? And then you check your systems and you go, are they really old tickets? No. Okay, well, we clearly have an issue. So then you start to figure out how you're going to address all those issues. And you need to hire, everyone has hiring problems and get them up to speed. But you got to kind of go into priority mode of which are the priorities. And if I can't do the whole fix, the whole solution, I'm going to temp it. And I don't know if that answers your question, but for me, it was clients let me know.
100%. So I'm with you, right? And you're right, clients will let you know. So one of the big things that I've always done is every client has an expectation. Let me start with that. And if just because they don't tell you what it is doesn't mean you shouldn't ask, right? Because if you gave me a ticket and you're like, yeah, just get to it whenever, there's going to be a point 1 month down the road, right, where you're like, did they forget about me?
Mm-hmm.
And it might not be 1 month, it might be 1 week, right? It's like, hey, I shoot Will an email and just say, get back to me whenever you want. And guess what? It's been 2 days. I was like, dude, did you get my email? So this goes into everything. So it's not a bad thing to ask or even clarify with your customer what their expectation is. And much like
Perfect
you said,
example.
they'll be telling you, right? Like they will tell you, yeah, no, a couple weeks, that's fine. Now you have an expectation, but it's very, very important. So let me tell the backside of this. Once you have an expectation, you now have something to meet. So it's a double-edged sword here, because just because they told you a time frame doesn't mean that you can go past it. Now you're accountable to something. Now your team's accountable to something. And it's okay, because the best thing about expectations is they can be managed. They can be changed, right? If Will said, hey, can you have this too? And if you emailed me and said, hey, can you have this back to me by end of day today? And then I wrote you back and just said, Will, my day's slammed, dude. Can I have it back to you by Monday? And you said, okay. new expectations Monday, right?
Yeah.
And it's no different with service tickets. But we got to be able to manage that expectation with our customers. And I guess the next part, a point that I'll go to is that a leak call is very different than a contract, right? Or scope.
Yeah. Very much.
And that was always a variable that I had, that I had 72 hours. And I know what some of you guys are thinking, no way, or I'm better than that. And that's great either way. But that was my goal, is to be out to the site within 72 hours. Now, did we always make that happen? Absolutely not. But it was a goal that we had. My contracts, 2 weeks. Did we beat that sometimes? Absolutely. Did we fail sometimes? Absolutely. But that was the starting expectation that I had, 72 hours for leaks, 2 weeks for contracts. So that way, when my sales team sold a contract, they instantly said, we're typically about 2 weeks out, and I'll get you a more tentative ETA as soon as it comes. So that was the starting expectation. Did you ever have anything like that in your world?
Yeah, I like that. The way you always handled managing the client expectations. But one of the things that we did was ask at the point in which the call comes in, hey, is this affecting the business? Do we need to be out? Do we need to drop what we're doing, get out there, basically? But even before that, sometimes we got the calls of, is this even a service call, or is this someone to send a sales rep out? So I always put this question in first. Do you want us to quote it, or do you want us to fix it? Okay, we're going to fix it. Great. What's the priority on this? We're typically next day, 3 days, whatever it is. If it's an emergency, we can probably try to get there same day or after hours. But that set the priority. It also set the expectation, and it also set how much we're going to bill them for.
Yeah. I love that, right? So the question that we're talking about is, how do you know you have too much backlog? And I think number one, we're both on the same page. Your customers are not getting the service they need. I think that's the red flag, right? That goes up instantly. Customers, a lot of work's coming in, you're not able to get to it. One of my recommendations is have some type of expectation, right? Some type of company goal. I don't care if it's you're going to get out to a lead call in 1 week, you're going to get out there in 72 hours. Set something so you have a tolerance to understand, right? And once you get past that 1 week or that 72 hours, right? Mine was 72. Then we said, okay, now we're starting to have a problem. Now I'm starting to see my backlog, right? My 2 weeks worth of work. Okay, we can't, with our current workload, our current trucks, we can't get to your work within 2 weeks. That was my, I don't say red flag, maybe yellow, right? But started telling me where I was at.
Yeah.
And I think that's the biggest key, is that if you have one truck, your backlog tolerance is going to be massively different than if you have 10 trucks, because you're going to be able to produce different. But as long as you're keeping an eye either A on the dollar, right? Because you know what your truck needs to build, win the day to win the week, right? That we talked about last a couple weeks ago, or your man hours, right? Every contract that you have come in, you should have man hours to that. And that's managing a little bit more like a production side. The only hard part about that is leaks, because leaks is kind of your search and find mission.
Yeah.
And the only way I've been able to work around that is understanding the NTE and how many hours are allotted in that. But again, there's variables in that.
No question. I think the answer to how much backlog is too much, or what's the right balance of backlog, I think what we concluded is it's a threshold, it's a tolerance. It all ties together because it also impacts your reputation, right? So as you start making these commitments, understanding the expectations for each client, in meeting that expectation, you start to develop this tolerance, right? And then as you start to feel that it's being stressed, that we're not hitting our 2 week, ETA, or our 72-hour ETA, then we got to make some changes. That might be facing the customer, that might be internal, that might be adding a truck, but to me, that's what it's all about. And it's not going to be off of a spreadsheet. It's going to be off of your feeling.
It's a throttle. From my side, it's always been a throttle, right? And that throttle was my communication to my sales team and to my service team, right? If I have no backlog, throttle is wide open. Technicians, what are you seeing on site? Like, we need revenue today. And then as soon as that backlog started getting big, right? Sales were doing great. I would back that throttle off a little bit, right? And I wouldn't be so hard, right, on my technicians as far as finding additional work and all that stuff. Now I still want them finding additional work, but it wasn't every single job you're on, you're upselling. Every single job I want to increase and looking for
Yeah.
that. So that's how I've kind of, much like you said, right? Create that tolerance. And I guess my way of just rewording it is that throttle. Got to have goals though. If you don't have expectations for your team and for your clients, I think that's where the cards start to fall. Is that it's like, oh, we're 4 weeks out. Like that sucks for my clients, but that really sucks for you because your clients aren't going to be coming back. And
Right.
that's probably a whole different session, but that's when you add more trucks, right? Is when you start getting consistently around or above that threshold of what you have.
Couldn't have agreed more. I like the throttle approach because you have control over that. You know, we got to go fast. We need sales. Like now we're bleeding over here.
Mhm.
Versus, you know what? We can fire our worst customers. That's a completely different problem to have, right?
It,
I think it's,
yeah,
you always learn that, right? It's like contractors that do a lot of leak work, consider raising your prices, you know, and the people that pay you the least, maybe they're not the best customer for you. I don't know.
there's so much to unpack on that, but yes, 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 right. There's customers that I have contractors that work with that make 10 to 15% lower gross margin because of negotiated pricing and all this stuff that they had to do to work with it. And when you start getting that larger backlog, right, and we start making decisions that aren't so I'm trying to think of the right word. I don't want to say desperate. That's a mean word, right? But you're not so like up for sales. You can start making better business decisions and that's a really nice spot to be at is when you're making decisions based upon what your core values are. You're making decisions based upon growing the business, right? Versus what
Yeah.
am I going to use today?
No, I love that. I think that's a good spot to conclude because that's where everybody wants to be at is that mature. We know we're confident, we're stable. Everything good stems from that. But to get there, that's the grind, right? Because in the beginning, you'll do any job, right? But we get to a point where we'll start doing really the stuff that we're really good at doing.
Yep, start vertically scaling. That's awesome. So, guys, that's I mean, I think that's your homework. If you guys are on here and you're wondering what's that perfect backlog, ask yourself, do you have that tolerance, right? Do you have that throttle in your business to where, I'm not saying you're doing it, right? But your team understands where that throttle is, right? That's the real important side because your team's going to do it, not you as an owner. So,
No
this
question.
is
I love
30
the
minutes.
homework.
Yeah. All right, guys. Thank you. Thank you. Will always, as always, dude. Thank you for letting me be a part of this. I love these conversations and diving deep.
I have a lot of fun doing it too, man. We'll see you next time.
All right. Okay. See you guys.
See y'all.